We are all subject to pressures which manifest through personality tensions. In the old days, when the majority of persons lived under a rather strict religious code, one of the teachings of that code was that a spiritual power or divine presence was aware of the workings of our minds and hearts. Deity was believed to judge us by our internal natures rather than by conduct alone. Under such a conviction, individuals made a greater effort to keep the internal part of their lives in order. Today, we believe firmly that we can have secrets. Secrets from each other, from the world, from ourselves, and from God. Thus it has come about that we no longer regulate our internal motivations with the same sincerity that marked earlier and simpler times in which folks lived. So that which is no longer provided by religious training and is not very greatly assisted by our educational program becomes a personal responsibility of the thoughtful person. I've never been much in favor of individuals attempting to psychoanalyze themselves. It is a very difficult process, and for the most part, we are not sufficiently detached to be strictly honest in such procedure. We are nearly always inclined to be a little kinder to our own faults than to the same faults in other persons. There is, however, something to be gained by an occasional survey of our attitudes and our actions. It is good to know why certain habits arise within our thinking. It is appropriate to discover, if possible, the circumstances that force us away from what might be termed a norm or a reasonable pattern for living. This morning, therefore, we want to study a little bit into the problem of the secret motivations behind conduct. The first consideration, perhaps, is to determine the degree to which you might need such research. If your life is a well-organized one, if there are no unusual personality problems, if your natural tendency is to be reasonable in all things and to allow common sense to direct conduct, then in all possibility you are not in great need of self-analysis. If, however, you do things which you cannot explain even to yourself, you find your nature suddenly moved to some irrational attitude by pressures arising within yourself, if your relations with other persons are not fortunate, if pressures are arising in your home or in your business, if you observe rather strange intensities with which you cannot always cope efficiently, and in the end feel that the only answer is tranquilizing drugs, then you are really in need of a heart-to-heart talk with yourself. Motivations nearly always arise from attitudes which we have permitted to rise within our own natures. One of the most common of these attitudes in practice is the inferiority complex. The individual within himself feels inadequate. Now, this feeling may or may not be justified. It may arise from a single pressured incident which has destroyed or undermined self-confidence. It may also come from a long survey of circumstances and incidents, many of which seem to indicate that we are not adequate. Now, adequacy for our purpose means that we have a reasonably contented relationship with our own abilities and capacities. Adequacy means that we feel within ourselves that we are sufficient to our needs. Now, adequacy will not always be complete. For thousands of years, men have sensed that they are never quite sufficient to their needs. And it is because of this interior realization that religions and philosophies have come into existence to assist the inner life of the person, and sciences to protect his physical existence. Inadequacy for the individual, however, is a very personal sense of insufficiency. The individual feels that this inadequacy may exist on one of many levels. We know, for example, the barrier of an unfortunate appearance. The individual who feels that nature has not been especially kind to him and has presented him with an asymmetrical body, irregular features, or something of this nature, may gain from this circumstance a strong sense of inferiority. Here, plastic surgery has proven a point well taken in psychology. I know individuals who went through life in a bitter conflict with themselves and nearly everyone else because their noses were an eighth of an inch too long. This was just something that nobody could endure. There are historical and well-established records of individuals who live for 40 or 50 years without ever looking in a mirror. They could not stand the shock. Also, there are cases where large and somewhat projecting ears have undermined life, have made everything in the world seem a kind of dark, melancholy gray. Plastic surgery correcting these visible defects has frequently given persons a new lease on self-confidence. There are also other signs by which we can gain a little insight. Nearly all the world's dictators have been small persons physically. Napoleon had special boots made so that he could get his head up as high as the shoulders of his personal bodyguard. Little persons of physical frame seem to feel this smallness of body as a particular disadvantage. It gives them great drives, sometimes unreasonable and irrational drives, by means of which they hope to create a psychological image of themselves, and for others, which would suggest vast magnitude of frame. The same type can occur with persons of extraordinarily large size. These individuals very often feel a great inward sense of disproportion and try to work out this problem through taking on careers and activities dealing with very small or tiny objects. One of the proofs in Europe in the old days of a good watchmaker was that he was over 6 feet tall, because he seemed to like to work with small things, as though to diminish in some way his own size. Thus, physical problems involving appearance, involving physical defects of any and all kinds, are likely to build up tensions. They cause defense and escape mechanisms to become prominent in the lives of these people. Perhaps more important will be emotional insufficiencies. These may often include a difficulty in emotional self-expression. We find a great many persons locked in their ability to reveal their own feelings in a natural and constructive manner. The individual is friendly by nature, but unable to express this friendliness. In family relationships, emotions can be locked, causing a great deal of sorrow for all concerned. And the problem is, of course, to discover, if we can, why these emotions are locked. And in many instances, this locking is due to a sense of personal insufficiency. On a mental level, we also have many types of, we might almost say, deformities. These do not mean that the person has a bad mind or an inadequate mentality. The real thing seems to be that he is unable to function normally and naturally as a mental entity. If his insufficiency factors come into prominence, he does not trust his own mind. And as a result of this attitude, he tries to force the importance of his mentation upon other persons. We all know the individuals who go through life apparently inwardly resolved to prove something at all cost. Just what they intend to prove, they may not even know themselves. But in most cases, it is an effort to demonstrate some kind of adequacy or superiority in relation with other people. This adequacy mentally may take on all kinds of specialized forms. And among these forms, many examples arise of those who become evangelists of causes, who attempt to motivate reforms, who try desperately to create important niches for themselves in this rather drab world. That such persons are quite sincere and well-meaning, we do not doubt. But beyond a certain point, these drives can be very difficult for those who suffer from them. And they may cause the individual to lose all of the advantages and pleasures and comforts of a quiet, balanced existence. In Western living, we have built a great deal upon the importance of psychic drive. But we must recognize that persons are not equally endowed with this drive. Many people come into this world who are not especially competitive by natures. They do not really want to be part of a pressured situation. When they turn inside themselves, they do not have the psychic fuel, the libido, to continually force their ways to successes. These persons would prefer to settle down in a moderate situation. They would like to enjoy life a little in quiet ways as they go on through the years. Yet they are part of a very intense economic system. In order to maintain themselves economically, they have to force their psychic integration beyond its normal energy allotment. Such persons are miserable. They do not take any real interest in the things they are doing, because these things demand more psychic energy than the individual has available. Under such conditions, if he forces the patterns, tries to release more energy than he naturally wishes to release, he becomes fatigued and exhausted. And a common symptom of this is the job changer. The person who after a year or two in a particular job feels himself completely out of tune with it. He no longer finds any reason for staying in that job. The moment these motivations begin to build and the attitudes arise, the individual must then justify them. So pressures must always be justified by some kind of attitudes, some philosophy of life that makes the individual appear to be right when the situation is distasteful to him. He must have his own attitudes, his own convictions, and he must break away from the situation. In many cases, of course, the individual breaks away with the stated reason that he finds the job distasteful. What he is really doing in many instances, however, is excusing some type of personal limitation. If his training is not adequate, if his interests are not centered upon the field of activity in which he finds himself, if his personal life is discordant, then he begins to seek justifications for escape. Justifications perhaps even for personal failure. This failure, of course, cannot be due to himself. It has to be due to something else. So a large variety of philosophies build up around these unadjusted persons. Instead of accepting the fact that they are unadjusted, they require themselves to accept that the world is unadjusted, that the situation that they find themselves in at the moment is impossible. Well, now there are cases where situations are impossible. There's no doubt about it. But under such patterns, the thoughtful person will look back over the years of his life. If he has merely moved from one impossible situation to another, then the chances are that the problem lies within himself. If his adjustments with life have always been inadequate, then he may as well face the fact that he is inadequate. You can, of course, insist and prove to a degree that the world in which we live is inadequate. This can be demonstrated and comes in very handy for the individual looking for excuses. At the same time, if he will look around him, he will find other persons doing a better job of living under these difficult situations than he is. If the man next to him, whose ideals are basically as good as his own, is able to handle himself better, then the person who is experiencing difficulty should pause and look into his own nature. The problem of motivations can arise from a wide diversity of causes. In our religious work, of course, we observe how often religion is used as an excuse for wrong motivations. While it should supply us with the highest motives that we know, it does not always do so. A person can take some fragment of a religious belief and use it to justify his own failure. He can use it to indicate beyond doubt that he is not in the place best for himself. With moderation, religion may help him, but if he uses it as a means of escaping, he is perverting the very foundation of religious principles. So let us consider some of the types of experiences that we encounter working with persons who have these secret pressures. We've already discussed before, so we will pass over rather lightly, the fatigue syndrome. This is exceedingly common today. We are all dedicated to the realization that the world is wearing us out. There are a few, however, that suspect that we are wearing the world out in certain respects. It is true that we are under greater pressures than ever before, but there is doubt as to whether the world can wear out a normal person. The normal person has sufficient internal resource to realize that the world cannot destroy him unless he destroys himself first. Fatigue, therefore, is unadjustment. It is rebellion. It is a psychic form of suicidal impulse. The individual not doing what he wants to do, not having the adjustments with life which he deems to be necessary, finding himself blocked and frustrated by conditions beyond his apparent control, can very quickly develop a fatigue mechanism. One form of this mechanism arises where the individual has no obvious escape from the thing that perturbs him. The individual, for example, who sees in the future only the continuation of present problems, may very rapidly develop these negative attitudes. We notice this particularly among enthusiastic young people who raise large families too soon. After a certain number of children have been brought into the family, the problem of maintaining these young people, bringing them up, taking proper care of them until they reach majority, becomes so heavy a pattern of future responsibilities that it is quite common today to find these families broken up by pressures. The person sees no reasonable solution. He sees no opportunity to be himself. He sees very little hope of ever spending the money that he earns for anything that he wants. Now, there are born parents to whom these problems are negligible. Their principal fulfillment in life is to raise children. They recognize it as a great social privilege rather than as a penalty. These persons carry with dignity large families, but those who are themselves less internally secure cannot carry this burden with the same dignity unless they go to work on themselves and straighten out their own thinking. The main point to be made is that heavy responsibilities, too quickly and enthusiastically accepted, will very often bring an individual suddenly face to face with a burden which frightens him, a burden which to him will destroy his own individual life, will force him to think only of others. And unless he is a pretty big person, this becomes a rather dangerous contemplation. We all want to be ourselves, and anything that would frustrate this gradually takes on a menacing and dangerous appearance. Another type of situation of this kind has to do with career. A person forced beyond his natural capacity very often gets into trouble. We know several instances, for example, where persons who basically and psychologically had very little interest in accumulating, that is, accumulating wealth, under the responsibility of an extravagant family, these individuals were forced to become highly money conscious. They had to use every device and strategy available to them, honorable or dishonorable, to increase income. Now, if the person is so naturally ambitious that this is what he wants, he may get along reasonably well for some time, although the extravagant pressures will ultimately injure him. But if he never wanted this, if it is a completely artificial situation forced upon him, then you will see tremendous fatigue mechanisms begin to develop. The person will become more and more conscious of a desire to find some escape from this intolerable pattern of events. Another type of escape mechanism will arise from over-sheltered children, where the child reaches majority and remains after this point too much over-influenced by conditions around them, particularly parental interferences. There are strong antisocial motivations created within the person. He again desires to escape. Perhaps situations make escape extremely difficult. And if his own energies do not allow him to escape, or do not give him the resources to get on his own, so to say, he will gradually fall apart inside. And in this falling apart, all kinds of mysterious conditions will emerge from him. It will be as though he had opened a Pandora's box, and almost every conceivable infirmity will be loosened upon his outer life. Wherever we find negative or destructive motivations, we must have some type of selfishness. Well, selfishness is so mysterious and universal a complaint that it is almost impossible to define it. Selfishness seems to begin with the simple determination or will to survive. And it is hard to convince anyone that he shouldn't have this drive. Selfishness may appear to be only the natural requirements of life, things which we should all have and should not feel guilty because we strive to secure them. But selfishness very often leads to a series of actions which in turn build up character patterns. And the selfish person is very often under selfish drive or motivation which will endure throughout their entire lifetime. If selfishness goes beyond a norm, we are almost certain to face some of the most complicated and disastrous consequences that can be imagined. A norm of selfishness, perhaps, is a reasonable degree of self-expression, that the individual maintains the right to be himself, to express his own convictions and his own principles in a simple, constructive, direct manner, that he is entitled to the product of his own earning, that he is entitled to have something to say about his own adjustments with society, that he is not merely required to forever sacrifice himself to others. Though a normal degree of this selfishness, when constantly associated with an abnormal degree of it in some other person, may also result in serious psychological difficulties, where the person has to give up his reasonable rights to cater to the extreme unreasonableness of other persons, then he has a very solid foundation for feeling that his own identity is threatened. Today in this country, however, we do not suffer so much from this threat to identity as we do from a broad program of increasing unreasonable selfishness. The person who starts out in life with the personal pronoun, the most important word in their vocabulary, the individual who thinks all through years of only the relationship of other events, persons, and conditions to his own satisfaction, the individual who lives to get what he wants at the expense of everything else, this person is almost certain to end in serious dilemma. So the pressure of selfishness, which is innate and almost inevitable, seems to be a continuing troublemaker. And under our present policy of life, we are educated in selfishness. We are taught to be selfish. And when a world of selfish people tries to get along with itself, there can only be confusion. Now, why are some people more selfish than others? The answer again is the strength of psychic drive. The person who has a tremendous intensity to have his own way, willfulness, so to say, nearly always is born with this. I do not favor the belief that all of these personality defects can be traced to environmental causes or to simple biological heredity. Persons are born persons. They are born with pressures which they must either learn to control or else the pressures will control them. I think the Buddhist point of view in this is the most reasonable. Namely, that we are only here because of pressure. If we were not abnormally pressureful in some way, we would be reposing peacefully in nirvana. The reason we are here is because there is something wrong with us. Therefore, let's all get together and enjoy it. Perfection is not bestowed upon one or any. No individual in this world can be absolutely perfect and be here. Well, of course, there is a difference between a reasonable degree of imperfection and an abuse of the privilege. And some persons seem to take it for granted that it is the imperfection that must be sustained, not the person. We are born very often with attitudes which are open to early conditioning. The person born selfish begins to assert this at a tender age. In fact, he is very likely to be well established before he gets out of his crib. Very soon he discovers that a continuous application of self-interest will have a demoralizing effect upon his parents. The more stubborn, selfish, self-centered, and impossible he is, the more he will attain his purposes. His family will not want to be inconvenienced and made miserable trying to correct an incorrigible. By degrees, they let him get away with it. And if he finds before he is 5 years old that all he needs in order to get what he wants is a bad disposition, he will cultivate it rapidly and enthusiastically. In older times, these incorrigibles came into life just as they do now. But the world into which they came took a little different attitude toward them. Some of these children were brought into line by the older severe disciplines which marked our way of life up to the 20th century, with the grand concept of spare the rod and spoil the child. The young impossible was not able to maintain himself so effectively. He soon learned that when he did what was wrong, he was subject to immediate punishment. Unless his will was extraordinarily strong, he was usually brought into line. He became aware that in this world you cannot always do as you please. This is a tremendous discovery, highly therapeutic. But of course he did not come into families as nervous as the children of today come into. If he remained completely incorrigible, society moved in on him. Antisocial activity was subject to immediate punishment of the most drastic type. Back in good old 16th and 17th century England, a thief could be publicly executed for stealing one loaf of bread. This did not make the individual any more honest, probably, but it certainly made him more careful. He found the tremendous pressure of society armed against him. He might break through to be a dictator or a tyrant of some kind, but usually the pressures of living, lack of opportunity, and the intense guild training through which most young people passed, all these together brought him into line. He had to restrict selfishness. Today he is less inclined to do so. Consequently, he reaches maturity undisciplined, and by that time it is very difficult for him to discipline himself. Motivations of selfishness lie behind most human tragedies today. A negative type of motivation, which is also present, is just simply old-fashioned ignorance. We have the feeling that with the high degree of literacy in this country, we shouldn't suffer much from ignorance, but we do. We suffer from the kind of ignorance which makes the individual unable to find a reasonable solution to his own problem. He has no patterns, no rules, no guides. He is unable to depend upon any strong system to give strength to him in moments of emergency. He is not tightly fitted into the social pattern as he once was. He is not required to fall into certain practices and habits which once directed his endeavors. With more freedom than he ever enjoyed before, he is left in the dilemma of being free to suffer from his own ignorance, and there is nothing much he can do about it. At the time when these matters are most vital to him, he is scarcely at a philosophic age in which he can adjust or adapt his mind to logical procedures. This is why it seems to me that throughout education, any subject that is taught, even reading, writing, and arithmetic, should be taught in a way by which the individual develops some moral overtone, some insight, some concept of how to conduct his own life. That learning should be so completely impersonal that the student cannot even apply knowledge to himself is lamentable. But many grow up with this problem. Under the pressure of ignorance, the person develops another kind of motivation, and that is just simple confusion. Many persons today live their entire lives from a core of confusion within themselves. They have no footings. They have no strength with which to meet the challenge of circumstance or any pressure of temptation whatever. It has come finally to reach the degree in which subconsciously more persons all the time are doubting that there is any reason either for existence or for personal conduct. The answer seems to be simply to drift as comfortably as possible through an uncomfortable situation. Under this type of motivation, where the individual turns within himself and finds only a fogginess, we cannot have much therapy from the individual. And as the world is becoming more and more composed of this type, we do not gain very much by leaning on each other. It is simply more uncertainty assembled in one place. Another motivation behind many of our pressures today is the success syndrome. This success pattern has been set up in a way to cause persons to measure their own lives in terms of the lives of other people. We are not aware of the basic individuality of man. This is a period of, we might almost say, conformities. Individuals want to be like everyone else, particularly the successful level. But because of the loss of individuality, because we no longer actually measure things in terms of our own abilities, we are inclined to develop a great deal of jealousy. We are inclined to be poorly adjusted, bitter against society, and envious of the few who seem to be highly successful. The success syndrome has also affected education. One of the marvels of life is that we are expected to choose our educations in those years when we have no idea of what we want to be in most cases. Today, the selection of a career for most young people is a family project. Everyone settles down and tries to figure it out. If father has been particularly successful in some line of business, he would certainly like at least one of his sons to follow in his footsteps. Today, this is by no means a certainty. Young people see so much of the pain and misery arising from the desperate effort to succeed that they do not want to fall into the same patterns themselves. They do not want to be like their own parents, who have given years of misery to a situation that has produced very little. So the young person starts out on his own. The great thought underlying everything today is to select a highly lucrative profession. The person to get along today must be in one of the money-making brackets. It is almost inconceivable that a student would go to a university counselor or something of that kind and say, "What course can I take so I will stay poor?" This is just unbelievable. As a result, those courses which perhaps have the greatest social significance have very few students. Those forms of education which would fit the individual to serve others are neglected in favor of those which will help the person to be an immediate success himself. As a natural consequence, millions of young people are being forced into careers for which their minds and hearts and abilities are not suited. Many of them become dropouts. Most of them are unable to complete their work successfully in a major institution, so they have to go into secondary educational groups. The great problem is to fight your way through into one of these few profitable professions. I've had a great many talks with individuals who have had every type of life tragedy you can imagine. And many of them admit flatly and firmly that their trouble originated when they took up a line of livelihood or a profession for which they had no basic sympathy. They became doctors without any real desire to heal the sick, their entire purpose being merely to get into an opulent bracket. Others chose highly technical careers for which they were not mentally, emotionally, or culturally fitted. And as this career closes in on them, and they see that they're going to have to work at it for the rest of their lives, very strange consequences can appear. To mind comes one case of a young man who was educated highly for a profession. The profession was selected for him by his father because it was good for him. The boy was a natural musician with a great love of sensitive and cultural things, so naturally he was trained in an entirely different direction. By the time this young man had graduated and worked for 4 or 5 years in an utterly distasteful occupation, he made 3 suicide attempts. In every case, overdoses of narcotic drugs. He was pulled through them, but the damage to his own nature, physically and psychologically, lingered on. He finally walked out of the appointed profession completely and went through a considerable episode of being a somewhat intellectual beatnik. He fell apart as far as his own personality was concerned. He has now been under analysis for 8 years to get back on his feet again. Of course, the purpose of analysis has been largely to try to make him accept the job for which he has been educated as his only way of maintaining himself. He may become patient. He may become resigned. He may say, it is the best I can do, I guess I might as well stay with it. But it will only be endurable to the degree that he can develop avocational interests in the fields for which he is essentially fitted. If he can balance it off, he may make it. But he has already gone through, as a young man, over 10 years of psychic demoralization, simply because he was forced to do something which was not suitable to him. Now, parents are not always responsible for this. The public opinion, the pressure of the time, the success mania, will in themselves do these things to people. Without any particular instruction from parents, these young people will seek counsel as to profession, and the counselor, as one told me not long ago, the only one question that is ever asked a counselor: what can I study where I can make the most money? This is the only consideration. Under such situations, you are bound to have a very bad motivation pressure. The person has been dishonest to start with, and he's lost ground ever since. He is not doing the things that are suitable to him. He has lost confidence in the integrity of society, and he has very little energy to vitalize projects for which he has no interest. All of this leads to the inevitable conclusion that the success pressure is not good. Yet it is one of the commonest that we have. And out of it comes resentment motivations. Under these resentments, which are largely due to internal discomfort, an individual can become a tyrant. We all remember how Samuel Johnson pointed out that many wars have resulted simply from green bile collecting in the nature of a prominent public person. These wars resulted from physical discomfort in some person who was strong enough to allow this discomfort to perhaps tear his nation apart. Any person who is suffering from a distinct physical discomfort is going to find his psychological integration damaged. How much more so is he going to suffer if he is under emotional and mental discomfort continuously? And this discomfort will frequently result in actions of an excessive nature. The grouch, the arguer, the physically brutal person who can no longer control his own physical strength, the individual who walks out on responsibilities, deserts families, does all kinds of unpleasant and antisocial things, is frequently in pain. Not kind of physical pain we know of, but psychic pain. The pain of deep, abiding internal unhappiness. The pain of having no satisfaction for consciousness out of the process of living. Nature sends us here to learn. And if by our natures we so lock ourselves that we cannot learn, or we are in some area of learning which is not suitable to us at the moment, we certainly suffer as the result. Each person will have to analyze his own pressures to determine their continuity and their direction. For by these continuities and directions, the substance and nature of the pressures themselves can be largely determined. Suppose you admit for the moment that you are under pressure, that this pressure has caused you to be a less desirable person than you would like to be. You find that your adjustments with other people are not good. You find that you cannot relax and be one with your world. One of the best indications that motivations are under control is that the person can relax. That when the person lets down the strain or pressure of activity, he finds a quietude and a compensating release from tension in himself. If he cannot relax, if he is developing the symptoms of a nervous wreck, then his pressures are much too great. If he cannot be quiet, if he must dominate every conversation, if he demands acceptance for all his own ideas and rejects everyone else's, if he cannot stand criticism in any form, resists all effort to help him, because this effort seems to take from his own stature, if he is secretly resentful of the success of others, and tries in hundreds of small ways to depreciate other people, then he is under too much psychic stress in his own nature, and he has to do something about it. Well, what is he going to do in the kind of world in which we live? He will ultimately have to make a decision. He must either correct the pressures and the causes of the pressures in himself, or else he must accept them and go on to whatever unhappy conclusion they will inevitably promise him. He cannot assume that if he continues to express these pressures, they will ever be any more use to him than they have been up to the present time. He will never be able to bluff his way through them. he will never outlive them. There are many persons who believe that by the time they get to be 60 or 65, they will quiet down. This is untrue. The pressure will go right on to the end of life. The means of expressing this pressure may not be as dynamic. Therefore, it will introvert. And the person who has not been able to get along with others during his early life will be plagued with the problem of trying to get along with himself in advancing years. There's no way out. If these pressures add up to a degree in which they can no longer be tolerated with dignity, if they are already endangering the basic values of our living, then we must really go to work on them in one way or another. So let's assume for a moment that we want to do something about it, something reasonable and practical. Each person then must try to determine the nature of the pressure in himself. He should put his own character in front of him, reflected in a mirror of thoughtfulness. We do know, if we are quiet, even for a little while, most of the peculiarities of our own natures. This idea that we do not know when we are wrong is, for the most part, not true. Even if our intellectual equipment is inadequate, our intuitive faculties will tell us something if we will listen. So we consider for a little while what some of these problems really can be and are. And if we find that we have some clue to work with, we will usually discover that what we need is moral support. We can change more easily if we can sell ourselves the importance of change. If we cannot convince ourselves that there are better things we can do, and that there is a better person in us than we know, we will almost certainly drift on as we are. What can we do to help to recognize the integrities of life? In the old days, our greatest support in these matters was our faith. We did believe in the Ten Commandments. We also believed in certain examples taught by those whom we regarded as spiritually mature persons. So we had a little religion with which we could console ourselves. And from this came a situation not too dissimilar to that we find today in Alcoholics Anonymous. The theory behind Alcoholics Anonymous is simply that belief in the power of God strengthens the power of the individual to change himself. If we believe in prayer, if we believe in communion with the higher principles of universal reality, and we believe that these powers can intercede for us, or can support us, or that a divine power within us is strong enough to achieve a victory of principle over compromise, and we believe this and really work with it, we can very often accomplish a tremendous amount of internal normalization. The trouble probably today is that, for the most part, faith is not this intense. The individual has a general believing, but he seldom, if ever, puts his weight upon this, depending on it for any great amount of help under a specific incident. We are more likely to seek help in sorrow or bereavement than we are in the development of character. The only other thing we can do is therefore to turn to a constructive philosophy of life. We can begin to convince ourselves of the orderly nature of the world in which we live. An individual who convinces himself will obey that of which he has convinced himself. He will not react well to the advice of other people. But if he can be made to convince himself, he will find that he has the strength to do these things that he now believes to be best. To convince himself today, the average person must have an intelligent philosophy of life. He cannot depend upon platitudes or upon vain assumptions. And in our time, because we are so closely associated with science, it is often easier to build a philosophy upon scientific concepts than upon theological concepts. Here again, I think the Buddhist doctrine is the most compatible with science. If we can convince ourselves beyond all doubt that we live in a world of cause and effect, if we can believe that we will be rewarded or punished according to the merits of conduct, if we can get every other thought out of our minds and gradually escape from this negative attitude of trying to get away with something because nobody cares anyway. If the person who is selfish, recognizing that he is selfish, and he can discover this with reasonable ease, if he is not quite certain, his friends will tell him. If he has an abominable disposition, someone will remind him of it. Up to now, he has cut that person from his list of friends. He does not want to be reminded. But as Socrates pointed out, the greatest friend is the one who does tell us our faults. If the person then really believes and knows that he is selfish or self-centered, neurotic, or has any one of 100 different pressures within himself, the only thing he really has to learn to believe is that these abnormalcies, these delinquencies, these useless intensities can never produce anything except the trouble which is innate in them. That they are causes, and that these causes must have their effects. The cause of selfishness must result in the penalties which nature has reserved for selfishness. And these penalties are loneliness, failure, misery, and sorrow. If the individual will accept that any negative attitude of his own, any unreasonable or destructive policy which he follows, must inevitably hurt him, that as he allows these negative situations to control his inner life, he is making an inevitable failure out of his outer life. That if he wishes to be happy, he must cause happiness. If he wishes to share in the joy of others, he must permit others to share in his joys. If he wants to have friends, he must be a friend. If he wants to succeed in an honorable profession, he must be honorable. If he wants others to be honest, he must be honest. And if he wants a good home and a good family, he must deserve these things. There is no other way. There is no escape from this. And science will support this. It will not support it on the moral level, but it will support it on the scientific level of the immutability and inevitability of the principle of causality. That just as surely as the laboratory depends upon cause and effect in every research it carries on, just as surely as the astronomer and the physicist live in a world in which cause and effect is accepted, it isn't even questioned. It is part of the very equipment by means of which progress is achieved. If we can realize this, we will gain. If we can look back a little into the example, we will see the working of cause and effect. And if we will trace even superficially our own experiences, we will see how this law operates on our own flesh. There is no evading it. This is our golden opportunity. This is the marvelous thing about nature. For just as surely as nature will penalize a broken rule and the one who breaks it, so nature supports and sustains that which keeps the rules. And one thing that the law of causality in its moral and ethical phases reveals to us is that we do not have to wait for the world to get better. We do not have to wait until the world solves its problems before we can solve ours. We are never this much attached to or part of our world. The world was in trouble before we were born. The world will be in trouble after we die. The world will be in trouble all the time that we live. But we are actually tourists. We are here for a while. For a time we mingle the streams of our own consciousness with worldly affairs. And then they separate, and our streams return to ourselves. Our own growth is not the result of the world primarily. Our own growth is the result of the internal life of the individual moving through circumstances. And the world is one of these circumstances. The person can control himself because the only power which can achieve this is within himself. It is not the result of delegation of authority. It has nothing to do with politics. It does not make any difference what condition the world is in. The person can control himself at any moment between the rise of his own individual initiative and his passing out of life, and in any moment in the history of mankind. It simply requires the person making the necessary endeavor. The moment we know that our motivations are wrong, we are really saying that we are setting up bad causations. A motivation is to us a causation. Whatever is motivated by a wrong motive will come to trouble. The Greeks made a great point of motive, and the old religious writings of the world remind us always that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And this is one of the burdens of the Socratic system of philosophy. It is not what a man does that is the final judge of his character. It is the motive within him. If the motive is good, good will ultimately come, even though the efforts themselves are clumsy. Perhaps in his effort to do good, he will make a mistake. But if his motive is right, he will gain from this mistake the insight and wisdom to go on and correct it. If the motivation is wrong, it makes no difference how noble the cause may appear to be. If it is inspired by ulterior motive, it will fail. We know the old adage, those who live by the sword will perish by the sword. Nearly every nation of the world has been raised by the sword. And nearly every nation of history so far recorded has died by the sword. The only hope is right motivation, right causation set in motion. The person who wishes to be selfish only long enough to get what he wants and then he is going to be unselfish never achieves this, because the basic motive is wrong. The individual who lives for wrong principles is one who breaks the rules of his total nature in order to gratify the whims of some part of his nature. If he does this, he is destroying his integrity as a complete person. If we could get these people who are suffering from wrong motives to believe sincerely that their motives are going to determine inevitably their futures, not only in this world but in the whole total universal existence, we might be able to get a philosophy operating in Western life that would be of some immediate value to us. We have to have a reason to be honest that is stronger than the apparent advantages of being dishonest. We can no longer be held by laws and rules. We can no longer be frightened into a kind of neo-obedience. Even if we are, this is not the answer. A man who is frightened into a state of grace is not very graceful. Actually, this change has to arise through insight, through the recognition that this world of lonely, frustrated, isolated, confused, complicated, sick, and miserable people is a monument to wrong principles. And no matter how well we have been instructed in these wrong principles, they are still wrong. And though 1,000 shall encourage us to follow them, they are still wrong. If everybody else does it, and it is wrong, it is still wrong. And no one is going to win. We have always labored under the hope that as individuals we are going to be exceptions to the rules of life. Other people cannot get away with selfishness, but we will. Other persons should never gossip, but we have the divine right to do so. This belief that we are different, that the laws of cause and effect do not apply to us, or that by some way we shall avoid them, has been wrong and continues wrong. Here we had a little religious problem. For a long time, people believed firmly that religion was in a position to expiate the law of cause and effect. If you made a serious blunder or you did something very bad, you could go and tell it to your clergyman, and he could give you some kind of absolution, pat you on the head, and tell you to go forth and sin no more. So you promptly went forth and sinned some more. Any belief which even permits religion to wipe out the values of cause and effect will ultimately destroy the integrity of man. We cannot even pray ourselves out of these things. We can be sorry for what we have done, and a good, forthright, honest repentance may be enough to prevent us from repeating. If so, it has achieved its purpose. The next thing to doing right, of course, is to be sorry to do wrong. But there is no good second to doing right in the first place. In midstream, we can't start out with brand new, pristine, pure careers. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things that were not good for us or for other people. There is very little to be gained by repentance at this stage in living. We can be sorry. If we are justly and honorably sorry, it helps a little. For the real purpose of sorrow or repentance is to remind us that it wasn't right. We can, however, start at any time we want to make such changes as we deem necessary. Our principal adversary will be habit. We have done certain things so long that it is hard not to do them. Instinctively, we fall into the old faults again. With watchfulness, however, we can escape most of this problem, inasmuch as habit has to be sustained by attitude. And if the attitude ceases within the individual, a habit which he no longer believes in will not endure very long. If he doesn't believe in it, if he doesn't want it, if he rejects it as a policy for living, this habit will cease because it is not vitalized, it is not energized. But if he has no internal strength and simply wishes he could stop making the mistakes, then the habit pattern will be much stronger than the wishing, and he will go on just the way he is. So we like to think that the best way to get out of this is to get back into the concept of an honest universe. It is perhaps more difficult for us in a society which we do not trust to be aware of a universal justice that we can trust. When everyone around us seems to be compromising, we have to get back to values to find out what cannot be compromised. We have to realize, perhaps by going out and looking at a mountain that stands against the sky, or the endless motion of the heavens itself, we have to come to sense that there's something bigger than this little civilization that we have built up and are gradually tearing down. That the great principles of existence remain unchangeable. That if man is contrary to these principles, man's civilization will vanish. The laws will go on. The lawbreakers will fade away. But we do not always have this peculiar courage of naturalness. We cannot simply separate inevitables from the little confusions and conspiracies of human beings. We sort of feel that they're all bound together, and that when we see dishonesty in the acts of men, we are beholding the wickedness of God. This is not true, but we feel that way. The only way to get out of that kind of a feeling is to shift the center of attention and consciousness to these things which do not change. There is no important fact of life that has changed in the memory or history of humanity. There has been no time in the history of the world in which bad has been good and good has been bad. There are times when men had worse policies, perhaps, than they have now and tried to justify them. But trying to justify bad policies, these men have vanished away in limbo. The answer we all have to come to is finally to make peace with the rules of the game. To make peace with principles, accepting them, and then, as a result, relaxing. We do not have to fight for these principles, because these principles cannot be destroyed by ourselves or anyone else. All we have to do is to accept a plan that is intelligent and live according to it. If we will do this, we will lower these motivations which cannot endure the censorship of our own integrity. Now you may say this is pretty rough going, and I think probably most people will find that it is rough going. But everything that is worth doing takes some kind of effort. The individual will cheerfully go back to school in order to get a degree in electronics and suffer and strain his mind and his disposition and his family resources for years in the hope of getting an extra $100 a week when he graduates. Anyone who will do this can also change himself if he wants to. The only problem is he doesn't see $100 a week in changing himself. He doesn't see that this is going to push him forward into the great world of successful failures. The resources are there, however. The individual can do what he wants to do. When he wants to do what is right, he will cease to be a neurotic. Until then, all the doctors and psychologists in the world can't save him. Thus, in motivation, we have to clear them out. We have to clean them, we have to reorganize them, and we have to get behind our lives positive, constructive, creative motivations. We have to find reasons for living that really excite us just a little bit. Reasons for living that make life a valuable, useful experience for which we are grateful. We cannot go along being sorry for ourselves and more miserable every day and get anything out of life except a sad and tragic cycle of misery. We do, however, have the right to take hold of this life and make it important. Not important in the terms merely of human rewards, but important in the term of total reward. Let's go back for a moment to the young man who hopes to make an extra $100 a week by going into these specialized fields. He is perfectly aware that by the time he graduates, the course has been changed behind him. He knows that within 5 or 10 years, all that he knows will be obsolete, that he'll probably have to go back and study again. An applicant for a job in an electronic concern was told not long ago that he will have to go back to school regularly for the rest of his life to keep the job. He is also reminded that the detrimental things to keeping this job will be anything that takes his mind off of it. Therefore, his family must be prepared to have him at school in all his spare time. His family will be lucky if they get a sight of him on Sunday. His children will never know their own father very well. They will only know that there is someone that comes and goes in the desperate effort to keep up with the job. This individual is chaining himself to what? He is chaining himself to the complete submergence of his own life and identity for $100 a week. That's $100 a week more than the pay of one lesser cultivated and lesser qualified. So in the end, perhaps this man at 45 or 50 will reach the goal of the young optimist of today. He'll be in the executive brackets with $50,000 or $100,000 a year salary. He will still be going to school. He will still be eating, sleeping, living, thinking nothing but transistors and hookups. It is very possible that while he is doing postgraduate work, learning a little more about transistors and hookups, he will drop dead. Now, the Greeks were firmly of the belief that man learns until he dies. This is perfectly proper. But there is a little question as to the ultimate utility of some of this information. When the individual drops out of this world, what will happen to his hookups and his transistors? Well, one might say, in terms of the good old belief of metempsychosis, that he is getting ready for the next time. That he will come back in another embodiment, practically the personification and embodiment of transistors and hookups. He will be so nobly cultured in these things that he will be the wonder of the ages. But when he comes back, he will be the wonder of past ages only. For the reason that by the time he gets back, there will not be one single thing that he has learned that will be better than totally obsolete. If he cannot keep up with progress while he's alive, even if he is only out of this world for 20 years, he will come back and have to start all over again. Because what he has learned will be of comparatively no value to him, even if he could remember it. So what is it all about? There will always be people who insist on doing these things because they do not know any better. They think they're pretty smart. But there are others who can wake up to the importance of making life itself important. The importance of good books, the importance of kindly friends, of the appreciation of great art, of a deep and supporting religion, the importance of a gracious life lived within the patterns of ideals and principles. These important things are the most vital consideration of modern man, and he has no time for them. And for lack of them, he is slowly extinguishing his own world. So my suggestion very strongly is that the individual begin to think in terms of cause and effect in himself. And whatever habit or practice is contrary to the dignity of his own nature, is contrary to the beauty, the continuing peace and happiness of himself and those around him, where he finds that his attitudes are only bringing pain, suspicion, doubt, trouble, jealousy, there is no earthly reason to maintain these attitudes, because they have no lasting value in themselves. They consist of a moment of gratification of desire and a future of uncertain compensations that are apt to be pretty miserable. So get out these submerged motives if you can. Clear them up. Trace them to their source. And then settle down to the quiet improvement of your own mind and nature in those blank areas of your thinking and feeling where these troubles can originate. They do not originate in the strong, noble parts of your nature. They originate in blind spots. They originate in doubts, in fears, uncertainties, and negations of all kinds. They originate in weakness. And the only cure for weakness is the development of internal strength and resource. If you will follow these thoughts, trace your own weaknesses, accept them, and resolve to strengthen the areas of value, you will not have to constantly defend your own standing. It will reveal itself as adequate to other people. So if you really want a little more happiness as you go along, a little more security and value in life, build a philosophy of life that can support you. Build convictions that will sustain your right motives. And build your personal way of life upon the immutable principles of universal and divine law. For only in these principles are the securities of existence to be found. Cling to principles, and the rest of life will take care of itself. Depart from principles, and nothing else will go well. This is the basic conception and value, and we hope it'll help you to get new resolution to do better things and do them more graciously as a way of protecting your survival, your health, your happiness, and your loved ones. For these are the problems of our day. Well, time is up, so we thank you. Now, we've got 2 or 3 notices. First of all, the PRS Center Study Group will meet upstairs after this lecture to discuss the various aspects of it. Anyone who would like to attend is invited to come as the guest of this PRS Center Study Group. I'd like to announce that in our gift shop, I've been able to secure a few more examples of the Nepalese art, jewelry, and objects which we had a few specimens of before. There is no regular importing of this material. No dealers carry any stocks of it. It is brought in usually by travelers or persons visiting the country, and the future of Nepal as a possible source of art is very, very uncertain. So we hope you will visit the shop, our gift shop, and look it over. This is the last Sunday on which the fabrics will be on view in our library. These are Oriental, hand-painted, hand-woven, hand-decorated fabrics, quite unusual and interesting. Also this morning, just as a sort of a close-off for the exhibit, we are exhibiting a very large Chinese silk tapestry, which has not been on exhibit at any other part of this exhibition. It represents the deity of longevity, the Taoist deity of longevity, with attendants descending from the heavens, and elderly Chinese gentlemen who wish the blessings of long life and peace and happiness are propitiating the deity. The piece is over 4 feet wide and about 8 feet high, and is quite unusual. We think you'll enjoy seeing it. Also, we'd like to call your attention to the general art material that can be seen in the library, and the friends there will tell you more about it. Also, I'd like to note that last week there were 2 requests from high schools in our area for opportunities for whole classes to visit art exhibits. The interest in this is increasing greatly and is a way of introducing young people rather painlessly to the beauties and fineness of art, to the more creative expressions of human talent, and in our group particularly, basically good art that is important and meaningful. So we are doing all we can to keep up with this demand. The notes of our lecture on eclipses are on the table this morning, so you can secure them if you so desire. Dr. Bone is speaking again on Tuesday evening on the scope of our emotions and how to use them. The spring journal with the notes of our lectures on world trends is also on the table. May I mention that next Sunday morning our subject is the cross and the lotus, the East-West contributions to a mature philosophy, that this motion moves both ways. And I've recently come across some very interesting figures for the last 5 years showing this interchange of cultural value. And we will discuss them as part of our subject next Sunday morning. Now don't forget to stop and have a cup of coffee and wander around and see things, and we look to see you again either Wednesday or Sunday.